Three watches, evidence 16 that the marvelous works in the future. Quote, while I viewed the desolation around me and was contemplating how it might be recovered from the curse upon it. End of quote. In entry 15, we reviewed how God would take the curses off the scattered remnants of Israel that repent and return to the Lord during the marvelous work. Quote, what are we to understand by Zion loosing herself from the bands of her neck? Second verse. We're to understand that the scattered remnants are exhorted to return to the Lord from whence they have fallen, which if they do, the promise of the Lord is that he will speak to them or give them revelation. See the 6th, 7th, and 8th verses. The bands of her neck are the curses of God upon her, or the remnants of Israel in their scattered condition among the Gentiles. End of quote. That's in section 113, by the way. In this entry, I want to review the prophetic dream that Joseph Smith had while in jail just prior to the martyrdom in 1844. In the dream, he returns back to the earth to resume his work, which he had referred to as his second commission. Many years ago, while I was visiting Kirtland, Ohio, I was taking a tour of a church historical site, and I began speaking to one of the guides who was a church history buff. After a while, he realized that I was a seeker of hidden knowledge and mysteries like himself, and he became very animated as we discussed church history. For some reason, the dream that Joseph Smith had came up, and he motioned to me to come into a private room where he wanted to tell my wife and I something. He was so excited that he could hardly contain himself, and he said, Joseph Smith stated in his dream that he returned to his farm. Yes, I said, I remember that, but what was the significance of that? He then said, quote, Joseph Smith never personally owned a farm in Kirtland, end of quote. Okay, I said, what's the significance of that? Quote, don't you see, he said, quote, the saints are in Kirtland were striving to live consecration in a plot of land they were living on, and it was referred to as the farm. He went on to tell me that the prophetic dream that Joseph had, the farm, represents the consecrated ground upon which the saints were striving to have all things in common, and the barn represents the temple. I'd heard similar interpretations before, but for some reason, the importance of the dream was much more powerful after listening to this brother. After studying many other prophecies that related to the future significance of the Kirtland Temple, I've come to believe that he's correct in his interpretation. In light of how Isaiah speaks of the curses of God coming off of his scattered people as they return to the Lord during the marvelous work, notice how the prophet ponders how the farm and temple might be recovered from the curse as well. Here's the account of the dream he had. Quote, I was back in Kirtland, Ohio, and thought I would take a walk out by myself and view my old farm, Stake of Zion, which I found grown up with weeds and brambles and altogether bearing evidence of neglect and want of culture. I went into the barn, brackets temple, which I found without floors or doors, with the weatherboarding off, and was altogether in keeping with the farm. While I viewed the desolation around me, and was, and this is in red, contemplating how it might be recovered from the curse upon it, end of red, there came rushing into the barn a company of furious men who commenced to pick a quarrel with me. The leader of the party ordered me to leave the barn and farm, stating it was none of mine, and that I must give up all hope of ever possessing it. I told him the farm was given me by the church, and although I had not had any use of it for some time back, still I had not sold it, and according to the righteous principles it belonged to me or the church. He then grew furious and began to rail upon me and threaten me, and said it never did belong to me or the church. I then told him that I did not think it worth contending about, that I had no desire to live upon it in its present state, and if he thought he had a better right, I would not quarrel with him about it, but leave. But my assurance that I would not trouble him at present did not seem to satisfy him, as he seemed determined to quarrel with me, and threatened me with the destruction of my body. While he was thus engaged, pouring out his bitter words upon me, a rabble rushed in and nearly filled the barn, drew out their knives, and began to quarrel among themselves for the premises, and for a moment forgot me, at which time I took the opportunity to walk out of the barn, about up to my ankles in mud. When I was a little distance from the barn, I heard them screeching and screaming in a very distressed manner, as it appeared they had engaged in a general fight with their knives. While they were just thus engaged, the dream or vision ended. End of quote. That's in Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, section 6, on page 393. This prophetic dream provides another testimony of the return of the prophet Joseph Smith and the fact that the marvelous work is a separate event from the LDS Foundation movement. This provides other details that we can discuss in a later post, but be assured that the land of Kirtland and the Kirtland Temple play a significant part in the marvelous work that will take place at a future time. The unconditional promises about the land of Kirtland and the Kirtland Temple will yet be fulfilled. It also provides a second witness of section 113 that we discussed in post 15 that refers to the God's people needing to have the curse removed in order to return to Him during the marvelous work. Okay, here's 2 comments. Malachi said, yes, I believe that the marvelous work is a future event and the dream does represent a future event. Who do you believe the company of furious men is that opposes Joseph? Who's the other rebel that rushed in and fights for control of the temple? I don't believe that any of the churches that have branched off Joseph's original work will be happy that he has returned. What leadership from any of the 3 branches, main branches LDS, RLDS, FLDS, will step aside and welcome him home? Watcher said, hi Malachi. Well, it seems to me that there are 2 prominent churches that have a great interest in the Kirtland Temple. One of them owns it, and the other one that probably wants to own it. I've wondered if they are the 2 groups that are fighting over it when the prophet walks away. It'll be very interesting to see how the organized religions that grew out of the LDS Restoration movement respond to the servants of the Lord when they return to the vineyard.